1, 2, check, check. So. Check, check, check. Aus. Also jetzt solltest du mein Mikrofon hören. Das da hörst du auch. Und du hast kein Geräusch mehr drauf auf dem Loskanal. Das ist super, gut. Also ich höre mit, zum schauen, weil sie werden unterschiedlich laut reden und so weiter. Es wird am Anfang vielleicht das Mühe gehen, bis es dann wirklich irgendwann gut konstant ist, aber...
Interview, wo kuschelt man drin. Das ist eine extrem wichtige Info.
Ja.
Dass du reinlässt, es gibt verschiedene Leute, die auf das Tablet sind.
Ja.
Jetzt höre ich den anderen noch, was schwätzt.
Ja, das sind die zwei. Das sind die zwei.
Reden mit der
Ja, oder das da. Ja, genau, wenn es so ist, das ist das. So.
Ich höre dich extrem verzögerlich. Alles, was du hast gesagt, ein paar Sekunden später kommt alles noch eins und genau raus.
Ah, ich glaube, das ist das Zoom-Ding.
Da ist irgendein Lag drin.
Das ist, glaube ich, das könnte Zoom-Session sein. Ich schaue das mal nochmal an. Das ist mühsam, ja.
Ist manchmal so, dass man im Saal nur der Hauptredner hört und die anderen Kuscheln noch, aber jetzt kommst du und bleib lang, das ist zumindest gut abgeschnitten.
Wir haben heute... Wir haben keine Headsets, das ist noch gut. Wir haben nur die sie in die Hand nehmen. Und wenn sie die so im Schoß haben, dann hörst du nichts. Aber ich kann schauen, dass ich die zumache. Ja. Eben, ich höre bei euch immer wieder ein bisschen. Ja, nein, das können wir gar nicht mehr machen. Ja. Das ist gut. Ja. Alex. So, check. So. Ha. Check. So. Das ist wieder auf Zoom.
Was du findest?
Das seid ihr überhaupt noch im Zoom, oder? Ja. Check. Du bist jetzt von dem Laptop. Du hast ja den Stream offen.
Ja.
Hast du da den Ton an?
Im Stream?
Ja. Ja. Dann musst du den aber ausmachen. Weil der kommt jetzt auch hier raus. Die haben jetzt gerade gemeint, das ist eine unglaubliche Verzögerung auf allem drauf. Ja.
Ja, klar.
Jetzt ist gut.
Ja. Die Leute hören nachher alles mit.
Also warum habt ihr den Stream dort noch mal offen? Ich würde noch einen anderen Computer nochmal.
Okay, soll ich irgendwo hin oder passt das so? Okay. Ja.
Ja? Okay, gut. Und das, wenn du das ja
Guten Morgen. Good morning. Please take a seat. We will start in 5 minutes with Global Forum Modern Direct Democracy, and I can already announce for the question and answer session, only people sitting in the blue area will be considered. So please come down, sit on these nice blue places, and afterwards, if there are more people coming, they can fill up back. So much welcome to be here. So we see you all, you see us all. In 5 minutes, we start. Yes, please take a seat on the blue rows here. We want to have a full blue row here because we want to be in the water for having our conversation today. Again, please, everybody who is coming, take a seat. We want to fill up our pool. Manfred Brandt, you have to sit here down in the blue pool. Yeah, no chance to be remotely. A lot of space. Good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome to the 2022 Global Forum here in Lucerne. My name is Bruno Kaufmann. I'm a journalist from Switzerland living in Sweden and one of the two co-presidents together with Joe Matthews of this Global Forum, and together with a great team of people, of partners, we have prepared this forum, which had to wait for a long time. We planned it for 2020. We planned it for 2021, and now we are here, and I'm very happy to see you all, to welcome you. It's currently 9 minutes past midnight in Los Angeles, so basically all over the world, it's the 22nd of September, 2022. In Mexico City, it's 2:10. In Seoul, it's 4:10 in the afternoon, and in Kiev, 10:10 in the morning. Here we are at 9:10. So I'm very pleased that we have a full day of work, of cooperation, of conversations about our issue of democracy in the world. We have traveled the world with this Global Forum in the last 14 years to many places, many continents, and this is the first time we go back to one country where it all started. In 2008, we had the first forum in Aarau in Switzerland, and now we are back in Switzerland. And not for no reason, because of course, Switzerland has been one of the home countries of this conversation about making democracy more democratic. In every country, there's a conversation about that. But in Switzerland, there has been, you can say, 173 years of democracy development, setbacks, progresses, but also the possibility for people and citizens to be involved in everyday decision-making. And this week, you know it, there will be a national vote, there will be cantonal votes, there will be local votes taking place until this Sunday, and you're all part of it. You have the chance also, we already announced that yesterday evening, in your materials, you see the three questions you can take a decision about. And it will be like that you are during all of today able to vote. There is a ballot box up at the info point up there. So you're invited to discuss with people you know about these issues and to make a well-informed decision. Of course, this is a non-formal vote, but I think it's a very educative one. And you will also see and experience how these issues are discussed. And also on Sunday, those who are here still will see how the counting will go, how the conversations after the vote will be there, and how both winners and losers will not be too unhappy about the process. I have a few other announcements to make. Initially, before we go into the issues, I have to say that the translation channel, if you have a translation from German to English or English to German, it's channel 4. It has changed since yesterday. Second announcement, there is a wallet lost. Yesterday, somebody left her wallet in a bag. The bags you got, it's a colorful bag, a colorful wallet with a keychain. So if you find that, please also go up to the info point and leave it there. Wow. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much. Yes, if all the issues could be solved like that, that would be great. I said it about the ballot. You have also to see that this forum takes place on many places. I mean, now we are in this fantastic former swimming pool called the Neubad. We will be here all day. We will be, hopefully, you can see, we are not underwater, but we are in a way in the pool. And this is, of course, a very nice picture. Also with this equipment you can use, jumping and riding this. It's a good picture for where our discussions about democracy takes place. The omnibus for direct democracy, it's outside at the river, also at the water. There is also the European public sphere. There will be events going on all day. This is a European public sphere. You will also have the chance to do yoga today during the day in different places up there. Even during the sessions, there will be no big words, but just for those who wants to be a little bit standing up, doing some exercise, going a little bit into the solitude with Professor Tallis talked about yesterday. It's also important to exercise. Now, the Global Forum is about, you can say, an issue which is to the heart of us and which has obviously experienced a roller coaster trip in the last 30 years. 30 years ago, at the end of the Cold War, we were all so hopeful that democracy has won. Democracy has overcome the biggest hurdles when it comes to autocracy, when it comes to extremist ideas. We were all very, very confident that democracy will win. At the same time, we also understood at that time that democracy is not just a state of government. It's not just something which you can put in a ballot, which you can put into a constitution, and then it will be remaining there. We also understood already at that time that democracy needs to democratize, needs to develop all the time in a way which is not done in a specific way, but in a way where people are involved. So democratization by the people, for the people, of the people, has been a leading star for many of us during these 30 years, making democracy more participatory, more transnational, more digital, more inclusive. There are many, many fields of democratization which still have to be won. But at the same time, about 15 years ago, we also understood that there are, as democracy becomes more popular, as democracy becomes universal, globally respected, there are also an increasing number of stakeholders, of actors which are going into the other direction, which are against democracy, against freedoms. And never before as today, maybe in these days, we get that so clearly shown that there are strong forces totally trying to fight, to make war against freedom and democracy. And that's, of course, for us, an enormous, let's say, obligation, invitation to work even harder, even more committed, even smarter to make democracy resilient and also really connecting with those who are democracy. We are democracy. Democracy is what the people, the citizens are doing in a common collective government system in a society. So in that way, we are on this roller coaster trip, and this will continue very much even in the future. So what's the Global Forum and all that? I just say, this is the Global Forum. And I think it's great to see you all here. We are people from 67 different countries, from 5 continents. And this is so impressive to see that you, after also this time where we couldn't travel, where we couldn't meet in person, are getting back to meet, to interact, to connect, to really enforce this idea of modern democracy so strongly. So very welcome again. And this morning we will have 2 panels introducing basically 2 basic issues. One about the challenges and options of democracy as such. How can we support democracy? And one, how can we make democracy more participatory, more deliberative? How can new tools of democracy, of participation, interlink with formal tools? So I will lead this first panel. Then my colleague, Joe Matthews, will moderate the second one. And then, in fact, dear friends and colleagues, we will have a full day of workshops, of seminars, of panels, of work, culminating in a networking evening today here in the Neubad Cultural Center. So again, very much welcome. And I would like now to introduce the panelists of this first panel. It's really about the challenges and the options and perspectives we have. And what we would like to achieve with this first panel is to give professionals, experts from different fields, possibility to share their experience, their views, and their hopes for democracy, from academia, from diplomacy, from philanthropy, from public media, administration, and government. Some of those who will now take the stage are very much active in different of these fields. And this is maybe also a typical development of recent years, that we cannot just be journalists, we cannot just be a scientist, we cannot just be politicians, we have to be everything at the same time in order to also cover these different fields. And in the end, of course, we are all citizens, we are human beings, which are interested in making democracy working and also blooming. So I would like to introduce the first panelist, Linda Sultzer. She is the head of the democracy division at the Mercator Foundation Switzerland. And Mercator Foundation Switzerland is a foundation supporting open, solidaric, ecological, and democratic society. And you are a political scientist. You have been very active also in other organizations in Switzerland. You have been one of the co-founders of Operation Libero, which have been very active in Switzerland in recent years. And also you worked with Migro Engagement. So we are very glad to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Second panelist is Janina Velp. She's a research fellow at the She's a research fellow at the Albert Hirschman Center on Democracy, the Graduate Institute in Geneva. You are born in a little village, I have found out, as a researcher, journalist in the northeast of Argentina, Irazusta. It's close to the Rio Uruguay, not far from Uruguay. And you're a political scientist. You have lived in Switzerland, in Catalonia, in other countries. Which other countries have you lived? Yeah. And you are really a very, let's say, active publisher on these issues. A recent book is Understanding the Use of Recall as an issue of direct democracy. And you're also a collaborator at Swissinfo, which is the media partner here, and are very much involved in all conversations, especially in Latin America as well. So welcome very much.
Pleasure.
Our third panelist is Simon Geisbühler. Simon is the ambassador Simon Geisbühl is Ambassador for Human Rights and Democracy at the Swiss Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's a historian and political scientist, has studied in Bern, Little Rock, and Yale. And Simon is also a sportsman. When he entered here, he said, yeah, from this tower, he has dived many times. He has been the Swiss champion in tower diving 5 times. And also you have published and written many books, history books, fiction books, or everything from Ukraine female farmers to immigrants from the Emmental to Argentine, and many other books. Welcome. And finally, we can welcome, and I'm very pleased to welcome her, Lee Chang-ok. Chang-ok is a professor of sociology at the Catholic University of Daegu in South Korea, where she has also served as a dean. And she has also been extremely and very active in the issues of gender equality and democracy in Korea and Asia and the world. You have been the co-chair of the Gender Equality Commission at the Ministry of National Defense in South Korea. And you have recently been the Minister of Gender Equality and Family in the Korean government. And we met for the first time, in fact, about 20 years ago, when you were the chairperson of the International Cooperation Unit at the Korean Democracy Foundation. And since then, we have been in close contact. You have also been the host of the 2009 Global Forum, Modern Direct Democracy in Seoul. Very much welcome. Yes, so let's go into our key issue of this morning, which are the challenges and options for democracy. You have different perspectives, you have different experiences, and we will do 3 rounds of question and answers here on the panel. And I have said we have limited time, so the answers shouldn't be more than 2-3 minutes. And then also we will have hopefully a lot of opportunity for interaction with you. But let's start with the first question. Which are the main challenges to democracy in your view? Janina, you have the first floor.
Thank you, Bruno. It's my real pleasure to be here. I remember I was the first time in Arau in 2008, so I'm coming back after a long time. Yeah, we have a quite challenging question, and I have decided to focus on 3 levels because we promised to be short. Which I consider are absolutely relevant to understand the challenges democracies are facing nowadays. And the first is at the level of the outcomes. And I would characterize that with 3 words: inequalities, uncertainty, and unfairness. And I think there are many more problems related to the outcomes, the global system of governance and the state nation is providing, but these 3 to somehow explain a lot the crisis of democracy nowadays. Inequalities, because there is a growing incidence of inequalities, and this is perceived as unfair. So people feel uncertainty regarding the future, and the unfairness of this model also feeds some of the bad solutions to these challenges democracies are facing. That's why I consider this absolutely relevant. The second level is the level of decision-making. And probably we will talk a lot about that today, tomorrow, and the following days. We are talking a lot about that. And I think there is a misunderstanding when talking about political parties, because it looks like political parties by default are like bad, and bad people is leading political parties. And I think representation is much more than electoral representation. We have many more leaderships in civil society. This is quite fundamental. And the reason why political parties are not working well is related to the incentives in the decision-making process. Switzerland to somehow is a different model, but when I think in Latin American countries, but also in many European countries like Spain or Italy or France, political parties have strong incentives to access to power and to keep power. And in doing so, they treat the adversaries as enemies, and this doesn't produce the basic conditions for a collective governance and for looking for good solutions. When parties are in the opposition, they are against whatever the government is doing and the opposite. And this is highly problematic. And the third, and this is a kind of provocation also, is on the level of the solutions provided. One part, I think we all agree, is incarnated by the authoritarian leaderships, the far right, the populist extreme options, which are fed by this uncertainty, by these bad feelings, and the bad perception on how the decision-making system is working. But I am also worried about some of the solutions which are offered as magic solutions on the level of participatory democracy. I'm convinced of the importance of direct democracy and participatory democracy, but I also have to say, and with this I close because I know we are short in time, participatory democracy is also a claim in China or in Russia. So it's not only about citizen participation. The Soviet regime, the totalitarian regimes were highly participatory. So it's not only about participation, it's which kind of participation. And we need much more reflection on how to include whatever we consider relevant to feed a better debate in a real democratic system at these three levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this last note about participatory autocracy is really one of the big challenges we have, especially to discuss in this kind also of forum. So, Simon.
First of all, thank you so much, Bruno, for having me on this panel today. It's great that my division, the Peace and Human Rights Division of the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, is a partner of this year's Global Forum. Let me start with a positive message here. I'm optimistic about democracy. Democracy functions, it delivers, it can self-correct. Studies show that there is a positive correlation between democracy on the one hand and peace, development, and innovation on the other hand. Millions across the globe, especially in non-democratic countries, demand more participation, more political influence, more freedom, respect for their rights, and more accountability from their leaders. But yes, of course, there are challenges, and we are here to talk about the challenges first and foremost. On the macro level, I see two main challenges, an internal one and an external one. First, the internal one. Democracies are facing worrisome trends of weakening support for the institutions and increasing dissatisfaction of the citizens with democracy itself. Citizens have less trust in the institutions. These trends are sometimes fomented by digitalization and by social media. Digitalization can shrink the democratic space through surveillance, and it can also worsen polarization. It can undermine democracy, and it's often used precisely to that end. Some democracies, we see this across the globe, erode from within, and the data clearly show a decline of the quality of democracy in democracies. Many in democracies have become complacent. Democracy is seen as a given, or sometimes even as a burden. And it has also become fashionable in democracies to talk bad about democracy. Go to a bookstore and look for books about democracy. 99% of the books will have a quite negative tone about what democracy is. And the 1% that is more positive, that will be the books that will not be sold very well because it's not in the overall mood that we seem to be in. Now, briefly about the external challenge, there can be no doubt that we find ourselves in a global democratic recession. Freedom House data show that 2021 was the 16th consecutive year of decline of democratic freedoms. Today, 2/3 of the world's population live in autocracies. Small bracket here. Obviously, this dichotomy between democracy and autocracy is an oversimplification. We all know that there are a lot of shades of gray between these two poles in a way, and we would also have to define exactly what we mean when we talk about democracy and when we talk about autocracy. But for sake of time, we use this dichotomy probably also throughout the discussion today. Autocracies have become much more aggressive in shutting down the democratic space and in their repression. The example of Russia is telling, where you see the interlinkage between democratic repression and the complete closing of the democratic space on the one hand, and the brutal war against a neighboring country on the other hand. Autocracies also try to undermine democracies through so-called sharp power. And it must be said, however, that this outside pressure on democracies are only effective or are mainly effective when democracies are weakened from within. And that's unfortunately the case in many democracies.
Thank you. Yes, you started with a very optimistic note, democracy by the many, autocracy by the few, but the few have quite to say just now. So Linda, in your perspective, which are the main challenges to democracy today?
Well, thank you first and foremost for inviting me, and hello everybody, good morning. Nice to see that you all made it up early. Well, to me, it's pretty obvious that the biggest challenge that we have to face is the climate crisis and the era of polycrisis that we live in, meaning that there's so many different huge crises that don't only exist parallel and next to each other, but they multiply each other. And democracy has to prove itself as a good and actually the best way to solve these problems. Otherwise, if it can't prove itself, we stand in front of a huge problem. And I believe that this huge challenge that we have to face with democracies needs three core elements in order to be able to make the way through this and to actually prove itself as the best form of government. And these three elements that I see are legitimacy, capability to act, and resilience. Because why these three? I believe that we need fair, effective, and long-lasting solutions to the crises that we're facing. And legitimacy is able to give fairness, the capability to act, so enlightenment in a way. Having an enlightened society gives the effectiveness. And then the resilience on the other hand, so having a sense of belonging and togetherness of the society makes it long-lasting. And I think these are the three core elements that we have to work towards in order to be able to face the challenge and make democracy the foundation that we can build the future on.
Thank you. I think you already entered a little bit the second round, but that's very, very valid because we want to talk mainly about solutions and way forwards. But Chang.
Yeah, I will say good morning and good afternoon and good evening, because though we are separated by time zone and space, our will to democratize democracy created this playground to run together. So I really feel at home to be here in Lucerne city, naturally, culturally, and politically blessed, and especially hosting this meaningful global forum. So I know from 2008, when this kind of a global forum has existed, a lot of sweat, passion, and the contribution and the intellectual wisdom should be called together. So in that sense, in spite of COVID-19's interference, but we came together. So in that sense, in this way, I really feel encouraged and try to be very optimistic in such a way. But I will turn, because my question is, what is the challenges? I go into the dark side. So the challenges of current democracy, in my opinion, is you may see the Squid Game in Netflix. So I thought Squid Game style game of election of representative democracy. It seemingly winner takes all game, but this kind of game finally has embarked in self-destruction of a winner himself or herself because of the ground has already collapsed. So uneven distribution of power and resources between the elected and the electing drives the election as a life and death game, which mobilize all the resources. So the post-truth, fake news, and anti-intellectualism and the confirmation bias has deconstructed over underlying common ground value and the mutual trust. So I think it is the one of the serious challenges we are faced now. So uneven distribution of power and information has mismatched with the uneven distribution of responsibility and uneven distribution of citizenship. So sometimes those who here, they are overburdened with their moral citizenship, but most of the others, they sometimes enjoying their free riding situations. So civic space has been encroached by consumerism and efficiency orientation and dichotomization. So media has become the tool of commerce. The ownership of Fox News and the CNN is the same. Do you know? So the political opinion difference is not the matter. So who get more attention has become the key criteria. So in this situation, so the main challenges of modern democracy, I thought, the deformation of representation democracy. So we came together to sustain democracy with a strong push forward direct decision-making process and to try to make a more even distribution of right and responsibility and a more even distribution of citizenship sharing burden. So that was my opinion. So again, I give my deep thanks to make me share my thought and my idea to all of the like-minded people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chang, for this, let's say, concluding list of challenges and problems. And of course, we feel really deep down in the pool just now. But at the same time, we see the blue sky outside and we see all of you. So we have a lot of reason for not being too depressed. And we are, for that reason now, going to our second question, which is, yes, what are the possible solutions and improvements to protect and strengthen democracy? And yes, Chang, you can continue. Yes.
So I really have in mind the possible. So there are many solutions, but the possibility is the key for me to answer. So I'm a very faithful student of a Global Forum because in Korea, we are to get democratic system, whether it is superficial or not, it costs life death. So in that sense, after restoring some procedural democracy, we don't know where to go. So at that time, I met Bruno Kaufmann in Taiwan. So I thought direct democracy is a way to go forward. So Global Forum is the really the viable school, democratic school for me in every sense. So strengthening global forum is the possible solution. So I was not asked by anybody, but because it is a very, very mutual learning process. It is a very paradigm shift of education, because usually democratic education for the young people, they felt it very boring. But I saw the omnibus experiment and this kind of this global forum named after festival. So even for the young people, it's quite attractive and gives some fun. So in this sense, new type of democracy education, and also it has created many internists. So crossing the border between the professionalism and the ordinary citizens, and all different sectors coming put together, and it can make a collective wisdom and a collective synergy to understand the situation of democracy in a more totalistic way. So one very possible solution to strengthen global forum and extend the participation is the improvement of democracy. So I did some practice in Korea. So wherever there is a small spaces and resources, I practiced to find a way forward direct democracy. So I organized youth academy, youth political academy. So 250 students were recommended by the sometimes local government, seniors and the teachers. And at first I found it is very difficult for them to vote for the propositions and the policy, because usually it was get used to election is related with the personnel. So combined with the United States project citizen approach and direct democracy module, so ask them first to find the social problems and let them try to set up certain initiatives and proposals, and among themselves they have voted for which initiatives should be go to referendum. And finally they selected certain initiatives and then go to referendum. And it is exercise actually, but local government leaders understand our new experiment, and those proposals which have passed the referendum were more than 90% were accepted by local government. So in that sense, try to make a certain little space to use to exercise direct democracy. That was my suggestion. Another is related to the big issue, so energy issue. So huge debate on whether the nuclear plant should be rebuilt or not. So that was the hot issue within the Korea. So our government tried to adopt a deliberative process. So we organized a deliberative committee to deal with the issue. But finally, we have decided this issue with the deliberation. But the problem I found is that those kind of deliberation process, because it is energy issue, the term is so highly technocratic, so it is very difficult for the ordinary citizens to be part of that, and uneven distribution of professional knowledge was the problem also. So, but anyway, within the limited framework, we have tried to use the more transparent and open and direct way of decision-making process practices is very important. I thought it is the kind of democratic citizenship education. So strengthening democratic citizenship education by practicing is some kind of a way out. So
Thank you very much. I also remember that you have worked very much with spaces, infrastructure for democracy in very difficult situation. When we had the Global Forum in Korea 2009, we visited the Peace Village in the demilitarized zone between South and North Korea, which you have been very active. I still remember these meetings with the people there at the river between North and South as a very impressive way of trying to overcome this kind of impossibility of living together. Now, Linda, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. Well, as I said before, there are three core elements that I believe are the challenges to actually ensure them: legitimacy, capacity, or capability and responsibility. And there are all different sorts of ways of solutions, how we can strengthen them. And I think you are the most important part of it, or people are. And with legitimacy, I see two main aspects that at least we also in the foundation try to foster, and that's to make people able and willing to participate. So meaning that they need to have access to the processes and they need to be willing. So what we can do to strengthen that are, as you also said, deliberative new formats or more democracy education, which especially in Switzerland is not the best. And have also inclusive policies, because I don't know if you know it, but in Switzerland, 25% of the people who live here are not entitled to vote because they don't have a passport. So this is one way to strengthen legitimacy. Then we have the capability to act. And this, as I said, needs informed citizens and people believing in enlightenment, in science. And in order to strengthen that, I think solutions are to strengthen media literacy, to strengthen local media, especially in federalized states as Switzerland, and to foster science, to give science the place in policies that it needs to have, especially in the light of the crises we're in. And then we have the responsibility and resilience. And the resilience is based on the sense of togetherness, as I said before. And I think there we also have all different sorts of projects, probably also present here today, that try to not only foster this sense of being a community or a team or taking responsibility for others, but that also try to think about new ways of the democracies we're going to live in. And I feel that there, and I'm going to come to that later, we need to nudge a little bit more for creativity, for imagination, for utopias.
Thank you very much. Really, you can say you have a list where to go, and it will be very interesting to talk about how to go there. Thank you very much. Simon.
Despite of the worldwide democratic recession we have briefly talked about, and I have said this before, the global demand for democracy remains very high. Time and again, the drive for democracy and also for direct democracy comes from grassroots movements, and it is anchored in local initiatives. I have served in Poland, I have served in Romania, and I remember very well having discussions with young people, very dedicated young people, who want more democracy, who want to build up a new participatory, deliberate democracy, deliberative democracy. I felt this very strongly, and this is where the drive comes from. It doesn't come from governments, it comes from the grassroots. However, governments can and should play a certain role. In a recent survey, over 90% of the Swiss people said they consider it very important or important to promote democracy abroad and to promote human rights. Democracy appears to be somehow in the political DNA of the Swiss people. Obviously, we would have to discuss what Swiss people means and what democracy means, but still, I mean, it's 90%. And so the message about the importance of democracy at home and abroad is very clear. And we have Article 54 of the Swiss Constitution. And Article 54 of the Swiss Constitution says that the Confederation has to promote democracy abroad. It's a constitutional mandate. So how do we do this? I give you 4 examples, what we are doing, and I think we pick up on some of these elements in the last round of our discussion here. First, we try to promote decentralization, local participation, and local good governance, and the capacity building support to civil society is very important. This is done mainly by the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, but there are also other parts of the government, my division included, which are active in this field. Second, a lot of good work has been done by experts helping to design constitutional frameworks in fragmented multicultural societies and countries, taking into consideration and adapting the Swiss model of federalism and power sharing. Third element is our participation in election observation missions. Switzerland is very active, observation missions of the European Union, of the OSCE, but also of the Organization of American States. And we do have contributions, concrete contributions to electoral integrity managed by my division. And fourth, and that's also very key, and sometimes we forget that this is part of democracy and democracy promotion, it's our human rights diplomacy. We focus a lot, when we talk about human rights, we focus a lot on freedom of expression, free media, and protection of minorities. And these are obviously key ingredients of democracy.
Thank you very much. You have a strong mandate, obviously. Switzerland is the only country where there is an obligation in the constitution to support democracy globally. We voted about that in 1999. And also what you said, that there is such a strong approval of that. That's, of course, very, very welcome. Janina, sorry.
Yeah, I will connect the solutions to the problems I identified before. I spoke about inequalities, and now Linda in the first round spoke about climate change. I think there are some key challenges which require more global governance. It's not possible to deal with climate change, for instance, from a nation state. And even I would say it's not possible to deal with it from a supranational level like the European Union. Now there is a huge debate on what means the green transition at the level of the European Union for the countries of the global south, where the lithium and other rare metals are extracted, having an impact on social life and conditions, etc., in the countries of the south. So I think this is a really big challenge, which requires more democratic global governance. We are facing a war now, so we know this is really difficult, but there is a path on that, and should be much more should be invested on that. And the same for taxation, etc. Then I spoke about the decision-making process, and I spoke about political parties. Here we are in Switzerland. I think context matters a lot, and then we should go in details and see what happens in different countries. The challenges in Switzerland, I think, are quite clear, some at least. Yesterday, Salvina Nabel spoke about abstention. This is a huge problem. Now you spoke about the amount of people who is excluded because are not born in Switzerland, or many are born in Switzerland but don't have the nationality. So this is a huge problem. In other countries with more like typical representative democratic systems, I think more direct democracy should be a really good investment. I'm quite not fan, but I support the Swiss model. I like the mandatory referendum and the popular initiative. I think are a great contribution. And this could be combined with other instruments like sorted assemblies to improve the quality of the public debate. So we have many instruments, and it requires more political will to really introduce that, legislate, and allow the activation. And finally, shortly, I also want to mention the community building. In Swiss Info with Bruno, we were working on participatory budgeting on the series. And I think this is the participatory budgeting and other instruments at the local level are not really powerful at the level of decision making. This is quite clear, but could be really powerful at the level of producing social cohesion and building community or reinforcing the community. And we need that to build democracy from the grassroots. So I think this is absolutely fundamental too.
Thank you very much. As you said now and completed this picture of, let's say, solutions to all these problems, it's really also, again, it's a global democracy issue. It doesn't mean that democracy is just global, but there are a global approach to many different ideas, many different experiences, and we can learn from each other. And that's really also the idea, of course, of this forum. So I would like to conclude this this round of, let's say, statements, introductions, sharings before we enter a more global discussion with very concrete ideas how we can best support and develop democracy. Maybe, I mean, all of you are part of platforms, of institutions, of experiences, of resources also, how to promote, how to make democracy more democratic in different ways. And I would like to start with, as we said before, a strong mandate, a strong approval. So what do you do, Simon, to make democracy more democratic?
Yeah, thank you, Bruno. I mentioned already 4 examples before to show you a bit what we are doing very concretely. I think the starting point must be that we understand, and you all understand this very well, that democracy obviously is a complex system with many interlinked elements and institutions. Elections, obviously, but participation, access to justice, media integrity, human rights, you name it. In order to strengthen all these aspects of democracy, we increasingly need to bring in different types of actors and maybe also new types of actors. For example, the private sector. Strong partnerships are also crucial to move forward in going beyond fighting the symptoms of democratic recession in a more defensive way to a more positive engagement. And I think it has been mentioned before, for us, a key word is really this democratic resilience. How can we build up this democratic resilience here in Switzerland, but also worldwide? And that's particularly important when it comes to backsliding democracies or emerging democracies. How can we work together with them? And it must be, as it has been said before, it must be in a partnership together with them to learn from each other, inspire each other. I go off script a little bit, but this might be interesting. We had a retreat a few months ago with a couple of colleagues from different countries, also from South Korea, by the way, who deal with democracy. And I had a very interesting discussion, or we had a very interesting discussion with the colleague from Botswana. The colleague from Botswana told me, you know, your democracy that you invented, it's great, we like it, but we had our own democracy much before you. And this was a very interesting starting point to talk about democracy. What does it mean? What does it come from? And especially what I wanted to underline here, how we can learn from each other and inspire each other. It's not about copy-paste the Swiss model. We know this is very specific. It's historically grown and so on. But yes, it is an inspiration. I have seen that. I have seen it in Poland. I've seen it in Romania. And I've seen it in the US. The Swiss direct democratic model, with all its flaws, is an inspiration, and we should use it. And we can use it. What I wanted to say very briefly here also is that showing solidarity with and supporting those who strive for democracy or defend it is also important. And I think what is important in the discourse also in Switzerland is that supporting democracy abroad has nothing to do with some hopeless idealism that we believe we have to bring democracy to the world, and that's a value in itself. It is obviously a value itself, but in a way the opposite is true, because I believe that values are an essential part of an interest-driven and a realistic foreign policy, because it is in our interest to have a world where democracy and human rights flourish, because it will make us more safe. And I think we should also try to have a more optimistic, principled, and also positive approach, not so much against someone, but for democracy and its undeniable strengths. That's a bit what I said at the very beginning. I'm still optimistic about democracy because of what it entails, what it stands for, despite of all the challenges. And one last point, and it has been mentioned a bit by the colleagues here on the panel, Switzerland must also lead by example and with conviction. We have to do our homework here, first and foremost. Yes, it's a great democracy, a lot works great, but we have to continue to work because a democracy is never perfect, and we have to work on it. And we have to lead by example and with conviction. Only then we can convincingly talk about democracy with others. And that's what we try to do also as a foreign ministry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, if we are not optimistic about democracy, what should we be optimistic about? It's a big question. Janina.
Yeah, well, I am researcher at the Albert Hirschman Center on Democracy. And what we do from the center is to try to work in partnership also with actors from civil society, organizations, etc. We do research, but we try to connect our research to things that matters to the people, and we try to offer solutions, advice on how to proceed after. So this is one quite clear way. And this afternoon, we will present in a workshop on youth participation and democratic innovations, climate change, etc. One example of that. And then I also cooperate with media, and I think we haven't spoken much about that, but this is also a challenge. Polarization is a challenge for democracies, and I fully agree here with this idea of avoiding to be too pessimistic. And I think we have a responsibility, the ones working in the media, on not feeding these extreme positions. Polarization is not something new, and conflict is not polarization. So we need to distinguish the levels in which we are, what we are talking about, because conflict is just part of a democratic system, because we are talking about pluralism. So we have to deal with conflict, not to avoid conflict. And to have different ideas about something is not polarization. But of course, there is polarization increasing. And I think the media in general is feeding that, because there is a system in which to attract the attention of the public. It's a media system also producing bad incentives in this direction. So I think we have a responsibility on that also, trying to separate and identify exactly what we are talking about, what is dangerous, what is just more of the same. I am from Latin America, and we see it quite often after an election. Of course, there are elections which are really dangerous, like the one coming in Brazil in October the 2nd, with Bolsonaro running again. But then you have many other elections which are suggested by the media according to the ideological position as something that will end with the nation and the country and democracy if the other wins. And we are talking about left and right, which of course has an incidence on policymaking, but it's not the end of democracy. And if we are not able to distinguish between that, then yes, we are feeding the grass for these authoritarian solutions and to these ideas of everything is the same. I mean, coming from, I was born during a dictatorship, it's not the same. What we have in Argentina now, for instance, as a democracy, than what we had in the late 70s, is not the same. So what we have now is not good, but what we had before was much worse. And I think this is really important too.
Thank you very much. It's very clear dimensions also and differences. And also, Chang, you were born in a dictatorship.
So first, because I have been in charge of Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, the women's work have been supported the social system in behind the screen. So like that, many of unpaid work and unpaid sacrifices have sustained the democracy. So I want to make sure that democracy is like a family work and a nurturing baby. So it should be taken care of. So, but usually the democracy activists and the democracy promoters do it with their own some kind of sacrifices. So it should be socially recognizable. That part is the very important part within society. So to try to create an institutional basis for those kind of people to work more effectively. So that is one thing I want to share. And second is usually in this kind of developing stage of democracy, usually the value was not implanted firmly, and usually the process were imported and copied by others. Because of that, when the system of democracy cannot deliver something, cannot be effective in problem solving, then the tool of democracy are easily replaceable. So in that sense, democracy should be accepted as a value because when it is closely related with the human right and dignity, then it cannot be erasable and replaceable by the functional efficiency or something. That is clearly bear in mind in developing democratizing countries. So in that sense, because we don't know, we are but very similar generation. We see the tragic of misdecision making. So in that sense, we are morally obliged to defend the democracy in some way. But the young generation, they are some kind of a little bit free rider in that sense. So they are more encroached by the commercialized, atomized individualism. In that sense, some kind of a more early socialization of public value is in need for restoring and defending democracy. And so we will try to say how the morally and in human base, the free riding is not good in certain ways. So for that, we need some kind of, for the young people especially, they are more efficiency oriented atmosphere. So we provide some incentive for their participation. So and let them feel some kind of achievement through participation. So try to invent a certain system for them to be part of this society, and this kind of more long-term and future-oriented public activities is the very integral part of their own some kind of growth. So that is the that kind of system should be invented. So finally, because we have there are many international institutions like OECD and some kind of development agency. But those kind of development agency are more targeted on development, economic development. But we all know there are from 2015, so we from UN system, we adopted sustainable development goals. So under the reflection that economic development may not some kind of effective in inducing real development. So inequality and the good governance and some kind of a democratization is the tool to get over all the problems within this global community. So in that sense, more resources should be on the in foreign aid, so on the issue of human rights and democracy, but many governments are very reluctant to run into that troublesome area. So, so the economic development resources or construction-related issue are very easily get consensus, but on the issue of human rights and the democratic assistance is still very debatable. So for that, we should make a certain opinion. So in global forum, through global forum. So finally, so in this kind of gathering, so there are many the non-European activists who fighting for their own democracy. So later on, maybe some of our responsibility to support them to be here. So that was the one point we should go. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, taking responsibility for democracy and getting the opportunity to taking responsibility, I think it's for every generation a new challenge and a new task. And obviously also here we can learn a lot from each another. Linda, you're the head of democracy at Mercator Foundation, and that's possible the newest add to this kind of support structure. Tell us a little bit what you are doing concretely.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you very much. So within this program that we're having that was just started in January, we have 3 focuses, and I actually already went a little bit into them. So we have this making people able and willing to participate, then ensuring informed and enlightened citizenship, and create the sense of togetherness. And there I said I wanted to go a little bit deeper down, but first I might just briefly say something on not only how, but also who should support democracy and its development a little bit more. And as you said, I'm talking to you with the head of foundations. And in this regard, I have 3 things. I have, you see, I like lists of 3. I have a call, I have a wish, and I have an idea. And the call is towards foundations. Foundations usually don't go into the topic of democracy because they think it's too political. And I want to call out to each and every foundation, whoever representative might be here. It has nothing to do with being too political. It has something to do with defending our fundamental rights and our freedoms. And I think that should be something that everyone should care about. That's my call. Then I have a wish. My wish is towards big companies. Simon, you also said it, right? The private sector. We have seen at the 24th of February, company after company pulling out of Russia. Why? Because they don't support a dictatorship. They want to support democracies because they rely on being in stable states. They rely on working in democracies. And I would like to ask them to take responsibilities for the democracy that they rely on and stop undermining them. Stop acting against the societies that you rely on just to make profit. That's my wish that might come true one day. And then I have an idea. And the idea relies on something that Janina already said, and that you also, Simon, said, that democracy is often taken as a given. No, we think it's just there. And people can come to events and put up cardboards with their opinions when they think it's amazing what we get when we have democracies. We just sometimes tend to forget all the benefits that democracies give us. And therefore, the other day, I just talked with a friend and we kind of got into the weird idea of thinking about how we could urbanize Switzerland. So be little Orbans, and think about how we could just little by little corrupt the system in order to get from a functioning democracy to a completely undemocratic system. And we found loopholes that we had never thought about. And it was super interesting to do that. What am I trying to say with this? I don't want you to be little Orbans, but actually to tune into your dystopic or utopic minds helps to connect to creativity, to imagination, to fantasy. And I just want to encourage you all to use the swarm intelligence that you have here and also in other events or with your friends and colleagues, and to think different, think in different ways. Just turn around and look at it, at a problem in a completely different view, and think beyond. And, you know, maybe in this way, we can find new solutions, we can find new ideals, we can find new visions of the democracies we're going to live in. And I'm sure that even just by a little, together, we can strengthen the democratic foundation that we want to build the future on.
Thank you very much. This is an invitation. One can really say to think and to work and to share. I mean, allow me one remark. Maybe it's better that there are many little Orbans than a few big ones. Now, we have heard so much of, let's say, also concrete ideas, works. I mean, I'm very impressed. And I must say, during the last 15 years, I have been more and more impressed how many people, how many institutions, how many governments have started to take this democracy development and support work much more serious. And of course, it's necessary, but it's not self-evident again. It needs people like you, it needs people who are engaged to make it happen, because otherwise it's just there and nobody really cares. And that's the biggest problem, the ignorance about these issues. And of course, here in this room at the Global Forum, we are people who are really committed, who are engaged, who are investing a lot of our time, resources to make a change and to invest into democracy. And investing into democracy is like investing into infrastructure at large. We are building streets, we are building, we are buying air fighters or whatever. But investing into democracy is at least as important as all those other things. And that's so encouraging to hear you, to hear these ideas, these projects, these lifelong works. And we have now a few minutes time for questions. You have heard a lot of things. Maybe you want to know a little bit more about something. Of course, we will not be able to extend that too much, but I would still like to give 4 or 5 people a short opportunity to share a very few thoughts and to have maybe a specific question. And there is the microphone. Yes, Daniela will come with the microphone to you. And please, if anybody wants to share, to say something here, up here, I think, yeah, we start there with and you will not hold the microphone yourself now. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Rob McDonald from Direct Democracy UK. Very interesting. It's been informative, but I can't help noticing that no one in the panel has mentioned the role of corporate greed in influencing of the reduction of global, you touched on some green points, but corporate greed has enabled most of the reduction of democracy around the world as far as I see it. So perhaps some view on that would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other such thoughts? Yeah, was there somebody there? Yeah, up there, yeah. The last row of the eligible people in the blue sphere.
I hold the mic. Okay. I hold it.
Hi, my name is Sam Chang. I'm president of the Negative Association in Taiwan. We have done over 15 researches over the last 8 years, both in Taiwan and in the United States. And what we had asked was, what if you have the choice to vote no against a candidate? What would happen? I'll just cite the last example. In the last US election, we asked Rand Corporation to include this question. And we asked them to separate out the data for the 12 key swing states. And it showed participation would have increased, I think about 3%. And Trump would have received -2 percentage points. Should not have been elected anyway. So that's our idea. We should give voters the choice to vote no. Each voter still has only one vote.
Thank you. Yes, one more up there.
Just give, yeah.
Yep.
I hold the mic. Okay.
Donald Khan from the Republic of Ireland. I want to query the Swiss ambassador who promotes the idea that private corporations will promote democracy. They will, as long as their own existence is guaranteed. The European tradition is when companies get into difficulty, they are nationalized, and therefore the executives continue in business. The United States tradition is that companies are allowed to go belly up. They fail, and the resources are dispersed. And that even happens in the United States when cities go belly up. They are not rescued by a central government. So I query the way in which involving the private sector in Europe will promote democracy and the checks and balances on the powerful that I believe to be essential to democracy.
Thank you. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, hello, my name is Uffe Wilkjær. I'm from Denmark. Thank you so much for this great conference. I'm a founder of the citizen think tank, Europe Dialogue, and I've been working with the EU Conference on the Future of Europe for more than 1 year. And my mission is just to continue this conference. It's all about citizen view of the future of Europe. So you can spread this out to have a global conference about what is citizen views of the future of the world. So thank you for this great event.
Thank you very much. Yes, up there, Lucy. Yeah. Daniela, you have to run there.
Okay. That's true.
You cannot swim, I see.
No. Yeah, yes, okay. Yeah. I hold it. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much for a great opening panel, really inspiring. My name is Lucy Kirschlin. I'm a co-founder of GLOCO, which wants to support global democracy. And that's one thing I felt the discussion, as inspiring and important as it is, falls short on. We are in an age of globalization with really pertinent global problems. Where do you see global democracy going? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have corporate greed. We have the importance of negative voting. We heard about the responsibility of companies, the opportunity of a European debate going global, and of course, the question of global democracy. So here at the panel, you get now a few seconds to comment one or the other of these ideas. Maybe you have some reflection about that before we then have a flying start into the second panel. So maybe you can start, Janina.
Yeah, I take the last question quite quickly. I think I mean, I mentioned that is the global dimension of democracy, the international level is absolutely key, and I don't see really like a good path on that way. I think at the European level, you can see many developments, but now in a period of war, I really would not say what will happen after, but what I'm convinced is whatever happens now with the war will affect strongly, positively or negatively, the future of this global democracy in the short term.
Thank you. Linda?
I think it's vital that twice we talked about responsibility and corporate greed, because at least for me, when the 24th of February, the attack on Ukraine started, and I saw all these companies pulling out, I felt like, okay, now is a moment to act, right? Now we should, make them sign some sort of, I don't know, responsibility overtaking plaidoyer for democracy, and then, show them the plaidoyer they signed afterwards when they start violating human rights again in whatever countries, or they start lobbying against the interests of the population of the country that they're stated in, which not too seldom is Switzerland. And it didn't happen. I think we need to stand in these moments together and, seize the moments. And I think it's not too late yet to do that. And it's horrible that Ukrainians have to pay the price, but it's even more horrible if we don't take action now and at least seize the moment to do exactly these sort of deeper, more profound changes, especially with regards to corporates.
Thank you. Chang.
Yeah. So for the negative voting, because we have experienced also. So, but sometimes the result is very serious. But we should know the inside meaning. So some of the political policy failure or related with this kind of negative voting, and we can accept this sign as we need more citizenship education. So that, and for the global, because we are in a very contradictory world system, because economically they are eager to globalize, but politically they are eager to nationalize. So it is a very mismatching situation. So those kind of contradictory mismatching has revealed that contradictory conjunction in this situation. So we can use this conjunction to make those kind of contradiction be more normalized. So in that sense, corporate greed cannot survive without certain social and political responsibility, which they are grounded on. So because ordinary people's opinion, which is related with the commercial grounds, if it has seriously changed, then the corporate cannot escape from those kind of social pressure. So in that sense, the final conclusion, more and more citizenship education. So citizenship should permeate it into the consumerism also.
Thank you so much. Simon.
Yeah, very briefly picking up on the question of corporations and greed and so on. Yes, I mean, probably companies are part of the problem, but they're certainly part of the solution, and that's what I'm interested in, and that's why I mentioned the idea of partnerships. At the end of the day, companies are not something abstract. These are people. They work in these places. When I talk to people from companies from the extractive industry, which I do on a regular basis when we talk about extractive industries and human rights, I don't talk to buildings, I talk to people. And I interact with people, and I try to build up these partnerships and this trust so we can move forward on questions of human rights, but also on democracy. And I'm really convinced that if we want to move forward when it comes to protection of human rights, protection also of democracy, we have to involve the corporate sector. Because I cannot name the country here, but if we can convince companies, or they convince themselves, that they go to the autocrat and tell him, look, I'm ready to invest $200 million in your country, but I need this and this from you. I think we can move something, and we will move more than with, sorry to be frank, with 100 declarations we do in the multilateral field. That's why I say I'm not naive about that. It will take time, it's complicated, but we have to work with all sectors, of our society and not exclude some of them for whatever reason. So I really strongly believe in this idea of partnerships. Again, it needs time, patience, but we have to go this way because it's the only way if we want to do real progress.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation, for your sharing, for your support also to the Global Forum. This, in my view, was a start really entering this hard working day. And this is the Global Forum. So let's go forward. Thank you very much. And I will now introduce my co-president, Joe Matthews. Where is he? He's working. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes, Joe, I saw you disappearing at some moment, and please don't disappear because this is a flying transition to the second panel. You will have a lot of time to interact, a lot of time for drinking coffee after this. And Joe, let us share what you are doing now.
Okay. Well, right now we have a panel. Please come forward, Nathan and Wendy and Andre. So I'm wearing the Mexico t-shirt today. There's no official announcement, but you'll hear it soon. But you should take out your calendars right now. Week of February 27th, put it in there, Mexico City. That's where you're going to be. A great country, you know, greatest city in the world, my opinion. And if you haven't been, you need to go. And we'll be talking about democracy, direct democracy, how we protect it in great detail. Should be fabulous. February 27th to March 4th. This panel is sort of like, this is going to be a little bit Los Angeles style. I'm channeling my inner Keanu Reeves in Speed. We need to go fast. There's a lot of traffic on the freeway. There may be some crashes and collisions, but please take a seat here. Actually, and where are the seats? That's the question. Which one do you want to get rid of? Take your seats. So we have 3 people here in person, 3 in and hopefully joining us on Zoom, Andre Hyman, Nathan Gardells, Wendy Willis, and on Zoom, hopefully David Farrell, Calypso Nicolaitis, and Ian Walker. Okay, so let's do this. All right. Oh, wow. All 3. Thank you so much. Can you hear us, David, Ian, Calypso? Great. Okay. The question of this panel is, how can direct democracy and deliberative democracy make each other better? How do the two become chocolate and peanut butter, rice and beans, Lennon and McCartney? What does it take? We don't have a lot of time, so we get specific. I want to start to my right. This is a panel presented by the Berggruen Institute. Thank you very much for making this possible. Nathan, you and your colleagues. Nathan Gardells is the editor-in-chief of Noema magazine, which you should be reading. He's co-founder and a senior advisor to the Berggruen Institute. He's been editor of New Perspectives Quarterly, and he is author of many things, including co-author with Nicholas Berggruen of Renovating Democracy, Governing in the Age of Globalization and Digital Capitalism. Nathan. Yeah. So my question to you, if you've got it, is essentially, is how do you get this impact? I mean, how do you get this impact? If you were designing, a citizens assembly for our home state of California, or if you were coming back to the Chileans, picking up the pieces and saying, we're going to do this again, but not with an elected constitutional convention, but a lottery created one that's representative of the Chilean population. What would you do, and what specifically would be that connecting fiber to get you from the citizens assembly to a real impact?
Yeah. Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me just preface it with just a couple conceptual comments to frame that question of yours. So there are 2 conditions that frame the challenges to democracy today. 2 basic conditions. Some have been mentioned in the earlier panel. Across all democracies, there is a breach of distrust between the public and the institutions of self-government and demand for more inclusiveness. Number 1. Secondly, since social networks have drawn more players into the political fray than ever before, never has the need been greater for a counterbalance of impartial practices and institutions that sort out the cacophony of voices, the welter of conflicting interests, the deluge of contested information. So the way to respond to these challenges, the way to mend this breach of distrust and deliver inclusiveness is through an idea we call participation without populism, which means integrating the broader civil society into governance through new mediating institutions that complement representative government and enhance deliberation in direct democracy. Some of this, you mentioned citizen assemblies, and I'll get to how we get there. Citizen assemblies that have taken place in France or Ireland, some of the people behind us were engaged in those in Australia as well, are examples of this, just as the citizen panels on the Conference on the Future of Europe that were mentioned are this kind of mediating institution. The problem generally is that where there are these kind of deliberative practices, they are not binding, but advisory. The problem with direct democracy, it's binding, but it lacks any institutional deliberation. That's the core problem. So when you go back to Chile, for example, or you talk about California, California is a good example. We have direct democracy, and people talked about corporations, but there's no check on a proposition or a ballot. There's no discussion or deliberation of it among the public. So, for example, 2 years ago, the legislature passed a law making contractors into employees for ride-hailing services like Uber and Lyft. Uber and Lyft didn't like it, so they went to the ballot with a referendum, spent $224 million to overturn the legislation, and their stock price was up 13 billion the next day. The citizens had no voice at all in this process. So a problem with direct democracy without deliberation is it's hijacked by organized special interests. And in order to avoid that, you need the kind of citizen review panels you have in Oregon, or you need citizens assemblies themselves that propose propositions or initiatives. Because in a state, here in Switzerland, you have 100,000 signatures to get on a ballot. In California, we have 40 million people, and you need at least 1 million signatures to do anything. It costs a huge amount of money. Ordinary citizens are not allowed to do that. They don't have the capacity to do it. So these kind of citizen assemblies linked to direct democracy and deliberation, I think, is the way to go.
Thanks very much. And there's a request from a couple audience members to hold the conversations and back down. There is sound travels well in this building, so it's sometimes hard for folks here to hear if you're talking, but it's great to be talking. That's what we're here for. I want to switch, go ahead north to Oregon, to Wendy Willis, who is your partner in the future, what was it, the Republic, the Pacific States of America with us in California, but you're a writer, lawyer, an advocate for democracy, founder and director of Oregon's Kitchen Table, which is at Portland State, executive director of the Deliberative Democracy Consortium. You've done a lot of other things, but you're also an author of textbooks, book essays, 2 books of poems, terrific recent book. These are strange times, my dear. That's a title that lands. So you've talked about, when we talked last, you mentioned, that the trouble with pluralistic democracies, in the world is that they produce they can be quite incoherent and unresponsive. And I mean, incoherent even in Oregon, where they've used direct democracy to legalize the drug laws. So you're supposed to all be more coherent now, right? So how do you deal with that? How do you reckon with that? How do you combine these types of democracy in ways that deal with that incoherence problem?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Can you hear me? So, I mean, I think some of Oregon's incoherence is because of direct democracy, right? So I took a picture of the table of contents for the Oregon Constitution this morning.
Okay.
And of course, there's, a Bill of Rights and all of that, but there's also water development projects, multifamily housing for elderly and the disabled, seismic rehabilitation of public education buildings, pension liabilities, school capital costs, state printing. So that's what the Oregon Constitution looks like because of direct democracy. So any random thing can be proposed. 8%, you can get 8% of the people, 8% of the people who voted in the last election, governor's election, sign a petition, and then whatever can come onto the ballot. So I mean, I think we're on a spectrum, right? So the spectrum, on one end of the spectrum is kind of ossified institutions that can't move, but are relatively coherent because there's been a deliberative process that developed them. And on the other hand, a sort of chaotic incoherence. And so I think what we're trying to do is try to create some structures in the middle to try to loosen up that spectrum.
You have a new project. I'm not. Are you at liberty to talk about it? That suggests, since I'm far away, I think I'm out of the jurisdiction of the American authorities. That suggests that the American Constitution needs a replacement, essentially. I mean, how would that work how would you imagine that working with the deliberative process? I mean, who would even run an American system? Would we have to ask our friends at INE in Mexico to come in and run it for us? They would have more experience than anyone in our country. So how would that work?
Yeah, I think, I think I'm really interested in foundational documents in general. So yes, the US Constitution, I'm super interested in.
Yeah.
I'm also really interested in city charters, state constitutions. And so because I think there's two reasons to do it, right? One is the structural reasons we're talking about here, that there are structural barriers to a democratic society. But there are also creedal reasons to do it. It's one of the few places we make a statement about our commitments to democracy. And I think as Simone mentioned earlier, there's just a lot of kind of background static about what we don't like. But I think it's really important for us to generate what we do like as a creed, and that sort of creedal energy then will can kind of launch a bunch of innovation around democratic practices. So, I mean, I think the US Constitution is one thing, and there's never been an Article 5 convention, which is what a constitutional convention would look like. There's a lot of opposition to it for all kinds of reasons, but there's a lot of practice that we could undertake about creedal documents before we got to the US Constitution.
Thank you. I want to bring in Calypso Nicolaitis. Her resume and all the different things she's up to, it was just exhausting to look at it. But she, among other things, is chair in global affairs at the School of Transnational Governance, where she convenes that's the EUI Democracy Forum. She's on leave from Oxford, was at Harvard, and other places. She's worked with a number of EU institutions, including as a member of the European Council's Reflection Group on the Future of Europe. She is co-convener, chair a number of initiatives, including the EUI-wide Cluster on Democracy in the 21st Century, with the European University. Anyway, Calypso, I want to I recommend her book also, A Citizen's Guide to the Rule of Law, Why We Need to Fight for the Most Precious Human Interventions of All Time. Calypso, you're working and thinking a lot at the transnational level, obviously, and I wonder, we were seeing transnational deliberative bodies. What do we know? What's the best thinking about how to make sure these transnational bodies have a real impact legally, constitutionally, when there isn't a lot of transnational government to sort of implement things?
Hello, Joe, and hello, everyone or next to the pool. I wish I was with you in the Global Forum, but in any case, this is a fundamental discussion. And Joe, you're asking, what do we know? Well, we don't know. We know huge amounts, as this panel and so many experts and my colleagues on the call, will reflect, because there's been maybe, almost 1,000 in the last 15, 20 years of deliberative democracy exercise around the world. What there hasn't been is doing it across countries, transnationally. There was a question in the previous panel about global democracy. Well, there is a beginning of a trial in the context of the COP26. There was one just a few months ago, but it was very tentative and difficult. Now in the EU, we've had for a year, in the last year, 4 transnational democracy panels with 200 citizens chosen across countries and all of that, but with lots of difficulties and flaws and complications that we are still trying to analyze. How did it work? So there's many lessons to draw from it. But I think that let me just put a few on the table. First of all, that you know, and I want to draw, when we drove from Nathan's and Wendy's, you know, already our brilliantly outlined vision, and we say, how could these local assemblies or even national, like in Ireland or in France, be applied to the transnational level? Many people say, well, no, the problem of scale, you know, how a few hundred people can aim to represent randomly, you know, the bigger group. The problem of scale is so hard to overcome. No, we can't do it. Well, I think there is a scale paradox that actually, if you do it, the transnational level needs deliberation even more, because people see their representative further and further around tables in the UN General Assembly now, and they're even further than the national representative or whatever. So in a way, people need to feel that they can connect and access each other directly, even if it's through watching a deliberation. And that's when our topic of the direct deliberation comes in, or direct democracy comes in. Joe, you said Lenin and McCartney. Yeah, I wish there was as much harmony between those two sides of the coin as Lenin and McCartney. I think it's more like chocolate and peanut butter. Many people like one but not the other, you know, except in the US. So what is happening in Europe is the first thing we need to talk about is to overcome, I think, in most quarters of traditional representation in the EU, the idea that, you know, direct democracy is not for us in the EU. Every time we have referenda, they create havoc in the EU. So actually, the way deliberative democracy and citizens' assemblies are seen by the powers to be is an alternative to direct democracy. It's to avoid and to being able to say, hey, we've done it, check the box. We don't need direct democracy. So what we want to advocate here in the Global Forum with you and with this panel is no, it's not an alternative. Actually, it will do a lot of things for us. Nathan said it already. You know, it's about taming the capture of our democratic process by corporation, and especially when they get to capture the direct democracy, or by populist demagogues. So it can do a lot of work for us by taking in direct democracy, but making it, taming it, empowering it. But I tell you, this is a long road in the EU, a very long road. And I think Switzerland can be very inspiring in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. You're getting a lot of applause here. I'm not sure you can hear it. I want to go back to you, but I first actually wanted to turn to my ancestral homeland and David Farrell, who's a specialist in the study of representative elections, parties, and deliberative mini-publics. His most recent books include the Oxford Handbook of Irish Politics, which I highly recommend, and Deliberative Mini-Publics. David, I was just in Dublin last weekend. And, you know, I've read all the great stuff about Irish citizens' assemblies. And my first question was to a long-serving 30-year member of the Dublin City Council, Dermot Lacey, about this Dublin Citizens Assembly. And it's convened to look at an elected mayor for Dublin and surrounding counties. And he immediately cynically said, oh, we just did that to kill that idea. And I thought that's pretty cynical. But then I read David Farrell in February in the Irish Times when he wrote, it's no wonder that Ireland is seen as a leading light in the world of citizens' assemblies. They have made important contributions on issues like abortion and marriage, but these high-profile successes disguise the fact that many, many other recommendations from previous assemblies have been ignored, rejected, or left to gather dust. That's a lot of time and effort and public funding wasted for rather little return. Much praise has been heaped on Ireland as a trailblazer in this space, but is this praise still deserved? I pose your own question to you. You know, what did you guys do right in those two that we hear about that you haven't done in all these other settings?
I think a lot of it is just dependent on the issue. So abortion and marriage equality were really hot topics and in my country, very difficult topics to deal with. And there's absolutely no doubt that the Citizens' Assembly played a crucial role in helping get those over the wire in terms of the debate in Parliament and then subsequently the debate nationally through our referendum. But once you go away from those big hot topic issues, there's a whole list. It's an exhausting and rather depressing list of recommendations going back now over a decade from Irish citizens' assemblies that have been ignored, rejected, and rejected summarily, so not even discussed, or put on a long finger in the long grass, whatever, pick your metaphor, but nothing is going to happen with them. So whenever I'm asked, what should we do if we're going to go down the road of citizens' assemblies, I just say go to Belgium, because Belgium is where you're seeing some of the best innovations in the practical use of citizens' assembly type activities, or deliberative mini publics, as we refer to them. There's a lot of really interesting innovations being trialed in Belgium, in other places, but Belgium seems to be where a lot of this is going on. So Ireland blazed its trail, going back about 10 years. We showed the world, at least, that citizens' assemblies have something to contribute, can really help. But I think the problem is we've got a bit stuck in a rut now. It's been largely taken over by the politicians and by government, the model of the citizens' assembly as is applied in my country, and it's not been applied as well as it could be.
So what can you be a little specific about Belgium, what you see in Belgium that leads to impact? I mean, I'll go. I don't think the coffee's very good. So sell me on why I should go and see it.
I'll just give you two quick examples. There's one that's called the Ost Belgian model, which a couple of us were involved in helping to design. And this is used by the German-speaking communities parliament. Belgium has a lot of parliaments. So there's a parliament for German speakers in the east of the country. And what that is it's a permanent citizens' assembly. And its job is to put ideas on the agenda that require a specific citizens' assembly to discuss. And then when that citizens' assembly has come up with its views, they're fed into the parliament, and the parliament is obliged to engage in a dialogue with the citizens' assembly. They can reject the proposals, but they must engage with them respectfully. So at least they're not ignored or put in the long grass. That's one model. And then the second model, briefly, is the one that the Brussels Parliament has adopted, which is where the citizens can petition for saying that something that's going to be discussed in the parliament should be discussed in a deliberative process. So the parliamentary committee, whose remit that issue falls under, establishes a special kind of committee, a super committee, which includes a random selection of citizens from the city of Brussels. And they then discuss these issues and come forward with proposals that, again, the parliament is obliged to engage with respectfully. And these are two, and we're seeing versions of this in Paris. It looks like Scotland might be moving in a similar direction. And indeed, the Conference on the Future of Europe, as Calypso knows better than me, is also sort of suggesting ideas that might be along these sort of lines down the road. These are the sort of ways, by innovating the model and embedding it much more into our representative system. Here, I agree with the previous speakers. I'm not much of a fan of direct democracy myself. I think that the better way of linking deliberative democracy is with the representative system of democracy.
Thank you. Let me turn to Ian Walker. Thank you so much for being here, because since I screwed up, he's the executive director of the New Democracy Foundation in Australia. He's been doing that since 2011. He's led over 20 trial projects at local government and state government level, including projects for state premiers on both sides of politics. It's ranged from, long-term budgeting for the city of Melbourne financial plan to the potential for a high-level nuclear waste storage facility in South Australia. You work on the state and local level. And I'm curious, when you think about the local level and what you've seen and participated in, what are the best ways to make sure that these deliberative processes, have real impact? And what are the pitfalls that people fall into?
I think it picks up off what David was saying, especially where the political sponsor starts with, I have a problem. Yeah. By definition, they're looking for, get me out of jail, help me out. And they're more likely to then adopt the recommendations, because if they could have taken another path, they would have done it. So at local government level, commonly we start the conversation with, tell me what's hard. Budget balancing, urban planning. These are things where you get criticised for all possible decisions. So you start with that desire to embrace it. And I think where people start from I just want to try something and be feel good and inclusive, it's a noble starting point, but that is a path to having a project that doesn't really go anywhere. And I think an example was used earlier by Nathan on Uber. There probably wasn't a great political appetite to fix in one direction or another. So it was, direct democracy would be good. A deliberative process probably wouldn't have worked. But where you're seeking a politician and saying, I am stuck, we found a very high traction in terms of decisions being adopted. So across about 30 projects we've looked, and it's about 90% adoption rate, amusingly, occasionally after several years. So some of them can be slow, but the problem remains.
Is there an example of where it's worked particularly well? Is there a model from Australia that you point to where, gosh, we really got the job done there?
Look, the best examples, I think, City of Melbourne's been a great project. It's getting a little long in the teeth now. It hasn't been great to have 2 years sitting on the sidelines because of COVID. But literally the city came to us and said, we're not broke, but if we continue on our path, we've got a $1.2 billion deficit coming up. We're a $400 million a year council. And we simply posed a question, how do we live within our means? And I think where's the markers, you talk about a model, I think you aim people at the hardest part of the problem. Things that are too broad become shallow, become a little bit wish listy rather than trade-offs. These have value as a complement to the political system where it solves a problem for the politician. And I think I've seen myriad European climate assemblies, and I don't blame the politicians for not adopting them. I blame people like us for not better designing the project. Oh, wow. Having a local government project looking at climate change and then commenting on tax rates they don't control and transport systems they don't operate, you'd start from what does my jurisdiction control? In climate, it's probably siting of anything renewable and what you build things out of. Why ask a what to do about climate change question? Why not point to that very hard part of the problem? So be specific and then give adequate time. And I see so many projects that are insufficient time with a massive project and it can't work from the outset.
Okay, that's actually a very good prompt for me to bring in Andre. In baseball, the most democratic sport, the home team bats last. And so here you are up last, but with the last ups. So you're from Switzerland, you're the Centrum for Demokratie Aarau, and you've conducted 6 citizens councils in Switzerland, including 2 in the form of the Citizen Initiative Review, which we often associate with Oregon, and 4 times in the form of climate councils at the, when he was just referencing at the city or cantonal level. And we hear a lot of good things about Switzerland, right? And it's direct and representative democracies are sometimes offered as models. So how does deliberative democracy fit in when it's going so well, or isn't it going so well?
First, thank you very much for the invitation and being here and for this question and this interesting panel. Of course, it's always the first question one gets asked here in Switzerland, do you really need also these deliberative processes because you have already the best democracy in the world, you have direct democracy, what else do you want and need? I think some points have already been tipped on that I think we need to think about what actually is the task of a direct democracy and what brings in a direct democracy or instruments of direct democracy and what is the complement a deliberative process can bring in. And Nathan, you said it well at the beginning, they have different tasks and different opportunities. And in fact, it's true, we have a lot of participation here in Switzerland. Only this Sunday we vote on 3 national issues, but at the end it's a yes and no vote at the end of a political process, and the people can say yes or no. So and in fact in the implementation or in the development of policy measures and options, there is a big opportunity also here in Switzerland to integrate deliberative processes to co-create solutions where there is not an easy yes or no answer. So I think there is also opportunities in the policy process to bring in deliberative processes. At the same time, in a direct democracy, we demand a lot from our citizens. We vote every 4 months here in Switzerland. There's 3 months on complex issues, on different issues. and it's really hard to build up one's opinion about all these issues. So we demand a lot from our citizens, and also here I think the processes like the citizen initiative review, where we have greatly been inspired by the Oregon model, is really a good fit here to promote public opinion formation in the Swiss process, to actually help citizens to understand better what they are actually voting about, and supporting them for building their opinions. And what is interesting about this is that the effects from Oregon, from the Citizen Initiative Review, so people who will read the statements coming out of a CIR, we see there's a knowledge increase, there is a high trust in the deliberative process, and it's also nice to see that these effects travel to Finland and also here in Switzerland with our experiences.
Is there possible to briefly describe like how the CIR worked in the Swiss context? One of the two you did. Where was it? What was the issue? What was the impact?
So we had two experiences with the CIR. One was in Sio in 2019. It was a national vote for affordable housing. We conducted it in the city of Sio. And the other one was on a cantonal level in the canton of Geneva with a cantonal initiative, actually to abolish the pension of former conseillers d'État, former chiefs of or executive members of the executive. And it was we randomly selected 22 citizens. They deliberated for 2 weekends on the issue. They questioned the pro and the contra camp of the initiative. They questioned experts, and they deliberatively formulated the citizen statements. 8 key facts, what you really need to know about the initiative, what are the main arguments against the initiatives, and what are the main arguments for voting for the initiative. This has been sent out to all the voting households in the respective canton or city.
Interesting. And did the citizens, did the vote go the same way that the Citizens Initiative Review voted in these cases?
In one example, yes. So in Sio, it was quite interesting. We didn't publish it, but we did an anonymous vote within the panel, and we see the distribution of yes and no was quite exactly the same as afterwards it has been in the wider population. So that was quite remarkable. In the canton of Geneva, it was different. So there, the task was a bit difficult as well, because there was a counter proposal as well. So there was an initiative, a counter proposal worked out by the legislative. And the citizen panel, there was a vast majority voting for the counter proposal, but in the end, the popular initiative has been adopted.
Okay, I want to go back to Calypso, and I want to ask for some free consultation on behalf of North America. Just to maybe a little design, and you have this whole team assembled you can draw from Calypso in doing this. But I'm going to say, let's imagine it's the year 2027, and the 2026 World Cup in soccer was a roaring success, jointly hosted by Mexico, the United States, and Canada. It changed the dynamic in North America. It reduced crazy American fears about the border. It brought these 3 great nations together. And so President Chicharito in Mexico, President Megan Rapinoe in the US, and President Wayne Gretzky in Canada jointly have decided to convene. They want a North American Union. Because why should the Europeans have all the fun and bureaucratic frustrations? And so they get this union together, and they need a constitution to start it. And you know, this deliberative wave still hasn't crested. So here we go. We need a deliberative body and to enact it. That's transnational. How would you design that process?
Hey, Joe, how long do we have?
We have another half an hour, and we can cut into the coffee break a little too.
And can we ask, I mean, my biggest frustration on this wonderful conversation is I can't see the crowd, but I can kind of feel the room. And I know they're coming from all over the world. So it's really their ideas that I would love to bring in. You know, one of my big beliefs is that when I say we, I mean the West, I mean the US and Europe, we need to reverse the democratic gaze and ask people from around the world, from your experience in democratic innovation, how do you judge us? What do you tell us? So now you're asking me as a European to give advice to 3 presidents whose name I've already forgotten, Joe, but I apologize for that.
We'd hire you. You're from Greece. You invented this democracy thing we're dealing with, right?
Indeed,
so what's the
with
model? What's the ideal?
So indeed, so you say Greece. So the first question is, will you make all these Mexicans, Canadians, and Americans feel that this constitution that will be written, I hope, by founding mothers and not just founding fathers and founding children, will represent them? So the first big requirement that we all discuss is inclusiveness. How do you create deliberative processes that are inclusive? And there are 2 ways, one, and that need to be combined, is that yes, these deliberation that are holistic across the 3 countries, where let's say you convene an assembly of 1,000 people and you make it super visible and transparent and simple how they were selected randomly. There's a whole pedagogy of randomness. Randomness, a beautiful concept that is very democratic. But a lot of people think, well, they're chosen by an algorithm. Why are they legitimate? So let's start with a pedagogy of randomness, if I can put it that way, why it's beautiful. And the second thing would be to say inclusiveness. We won't do it like the US founding fathers, on the East Coast somewhere. Well, not even on the West Coast somewhere. It has to be everywhere, polycentric. As Margaret Ostrom and so many others, polycentricity, many centers, many places. So, I'm not 100% sure there would need to be a constitution anyway, Joe, but if I take your, thought experiment, let's have 1,000 flower bloom. And let's have those, randomly selected assemblies debate everywhere in this new union. And then each send ambassadors to not one center, but then create centers that will rotate all around. So one day it will be, in Montreal. The next day it will be in Chicago. And the third day, it will be in Mexico. And it will rotate, and in smaller cities and all of that. So you would create in that way, and using, of course, e-democracy and just plurification of debate. And of course, David has huge experience in how this worked quite well in the Irish context, where pulling the media in. But here we're talking transnational. So you're going to have to use also all the wonderful new translation technology. So I'm trying to paint a very rosy picture of that wonderful world that you're giving us, Joe. I love it. And if I had another half hour, I would, converse with everyone in the room as to what will be the obstacles. Let's think about everybody who would resist this in the 3 countries. And how do you either neutralize them? Let's not forget there is power in the world, or how you co-opt them. And let's think about this together, because that's what you're suggesting, Joe, a common process. And let's not forget that in this whole story, when we're talking about direct democracy and how to combine with deliberation, we need to bring politicians in and make them feel secure, which was one of the great challenges of the Conference on the Future of Europe. Fascinating learning process of politicians trying to get their heads around what's going on with these citizens ambassadors, trying to tell them what to think. And at the end of the day, Joe, you're going to now tell me, well, will this constitution be put to a vote? And well, that's what we're talking about in this panel, isn't it? Yeah. Yes, because we are going to try to create a mega Switzerland on the other side of the Atlantic, because we just heard beautifully that, in Switzerland, you have informed public opinion. Even without formal deliberative process, you have all these micro deliberation everywhere when you have direct democracy. So that's also the meta agenda that you're giving us, Joe, for this new union, this new NAFTA reincarnated union, it will be that this kind of culture takes root thanks to this constitutional moment. So it would be a constitutional moment of deliberation. And then I tell you, we would have a vote and we wouldn't lose it like it has been lost in Chile, because as Nathan has beautifully written in Noema very recently, it would be an inclusive process. And that's the key to winning the vote at the end of the day.
That was great. Thank you. David, do you want to get in on this? Do you have any thoughts on this project?
Yeah, I always find Calypso's thought experiments fascinating. So I'm just sort of in awe always of everything that she has to say in these areas. But I mean, certainly I'll just mention one thing which I found one of the most incredible, I know this might sound a little bit strange, but one of the most incredible moments I've ever experienced, which was when the Conference on the Future of Europe, one of the panels came to Dublin. They came to Dublin Castle, and I was very lucky to be able to sit in on one of the small group deliberations. I was describing this to a colleague yesterday. It was like watching a dubbed movie. You know, I was sitting in the room with these headphones on, and there were, I think it was 8 or 10 citizens, each from a different European country, each speaking a different European language, interpreters in Brussels, remotely interpreting in real time what these people were saying to each other. And after a few minutes, you forget, you're listening, I'm listening in English to all of these things. Now and again, it's a bit confusing when it's a male voice, but it's a woman who's speaking. But other than that, it's perfect. I mean, almost perfect deliberation. And so the Conference on the Future of Europe, for all its faults and failings, it's a really interesting experiment, shows that the kind of thing you're talking about, which would be involving at least 3 different language groupings, if not more, could work. And we know now that these things can work.
And David, if I can say, you remember one of the beauties of translations that we were discussing is that it slows down the conversation a bit. And in a way, that's even better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ian, do you have thoughts on this? Do you have
probably just 2 points I'd add in. I was flinching a little bit, Joe, at some of your language. It was almost, how do we sell people this decision? And appreciating it's a thought experiment, it's kind of the wrong place to start. There's no right answers to most public questions. We ask an open question, and if people really don't want to be part of a North American Union, that's an awesome answer too. The question is whether they've thought about it or whether it's just an opinion reaction. And I often think of, you know, what's the key concept we're working here? We're just trying to find a trusted decision. And that starts from this people like me test. And a lot of the time, what's hard about transnational is that it's in any, you know, pick your COP26, they operate at this elite level that is not related to people's daily lives. So we have these international decisions that get brought back to people, and domestic politicians can't implement them because there isn't a sense. I'd really encourage people to think of who is that people like me test. In the United States, you've probably got West Coast views, Midwest views, so on and so forth. There's half a dozen locations. Think first about how people identify with that people like me line first and build up from there. I always get a little bit worried by, you know, as we go through airports, you probably hear the phrase, we have performative security. It's probably not going to work, but we feel better with all the scanners and wands, etc. There's a bit of theatre of security. And I often look at it through the lens of how much are we doing a theatre of democracy rather than a substantive attempt to say, right, what should we be focusing on? I think that maybe a future panel, the thought experiment to do might be, I think President Biden would love to reform gun laws in the United States. That's a design worth doing that would come with endorsement, that would come from that ability to do a distributed project and think in terms of who are the people like me, those East Coast elites, those West Coast liberals, some of the funny places in the middle as well, and start to work out, right, how do we build it so that my local view is represented, but then I start to mix and start to go through there. The transnational one's super difficult because language, it can be a barrier to just that free-flowing conversation. I think what the EU attempted was heroically difficult.
Yeah, that's a great point. Also reminds me, we would have to make sure that the deliberative spaces are exempt from the open carry laws in the US. And sorry about Cell. It's just 4 generations of family in Southern California. It's too close to Hollywood. The 3 of you, Wendy and then Nathan, Andre, on this question of, you know, which I'm really trying to get is, what is the model way to connect before we go to questions from the audience? Model way to connect to, you know, how to do a big gnarly, national or transnational, deliberative democracy. How do you, how do you,
Well,
what do you think of,
I
what's
don't
your
think it has
model?
to be, California is 5th largest economy in the world, 40 million people. So you're almost at that kind of a situation there. In terms of constitution, I think you got to be very careful. And we know, we just watched the Chilean situation. A constitution can't be a grab bag of everyone's social wishes or constituencies. The constitution is about basic rights and about the rules of political competition so that it can be peaceful and not violent. So there's checks and balances. Government, as I said about Senate, bicameral legislature, a government is a positive, a constitution is a negative. A government is what acts, and the constitution is what amends or resists action. So you need those rules. The constitution should focus on that. Now, in terms of how to come up with a deliberative process, we saw in the Chilean situation, because delegates were elected, there was a lot of politics in it, and the right wing wanted a two-thirds vote in order to put a constitution to the public.
That was within the convention, yeah.
Within their convention, but the right wing did not get 35 or 40% of the vote. They only got 20%. So it was a partisan Congress that was elected, assembly that was elected, and they were largely left behind constituencies who, not surprisingly, got a chance to get ahead and went too far by excluding some mainstream constituencies. So that ended up in frustration. I think when I heard Calypso, one way to deal with the constitution of an assembly, not a constitution, but how do you constitute an assembly, sortition instead of election is a better way to get a random sampling of the public that's not distorted like an echo chamber is with social media. Sortition is a better way to get a broad representation that is, random selection like in the old early Greek democracy. But I'm in favor also, and I discussed this with former President Lagos of Chile just last week, how to go forward. You need, since you have a representative democracy in place, you need the political parties or some representation of those political parties that represent the balance of power currently somehow in the mix. If they don't have a say, it's not going to work. Similarly, you need experts who know what they're talking about in constitutions, checks and balances, the history of constitutions, constitutional theory, and so on. So I think a mix of sortition, a mix of experts, and a mix of the political balance that exists currently. An example, and I'll stop here, an example in California, not in constitution, but in drawing legislative districts, so there's not gerrymandering. There's a citizens commission that draws electoral districts. We had a ballot initiative that took it away from the legislature, 8 years ago or 10 years ago. And you have, I forget the exact number of people, I think it's 13 or so. You have representatives of the two main political parties, and then you have randomly selected citizens. And the process together allows for a fair set of rules coming out of it that are legitimate because of the composition of how that commission is. So I think you have to limit what the Constitution does, and then you have to make sure that those who are how the assembly itself is constituted to make it work.
Any design tips from you all? I mean, I do wonder sort of, if deliberative, the sort of electoral representative, the deliberative body, the electoral representative bodies, the direct democracy, if they check each other in a system, how do you make sure you're frustrated?
You're going to be frustrated.
Right.
Like that's
get them to act. If the deliberative body is something that the legislative body has to say yes or no, or offer a counter proposal, they both go to the direct democratic body. I'm designing on the fly here. I mean, in my thing, I don't know how you would do it. The problem is the Americans just refuse to have national elections, but like a modern country. But how? I mean, any design tips from what you've heard?
First of all, poets are scavengers. And so I have dibs on the title, The Pedagogy of Randomness, for a poem title. I think there's so many great technical suggestions here. And I think one of the things about where we are right now is we have to be able to do more than one thing at a time. And if we're really like trying to swing for the fences and to do a massive constitutional deliberation, but I'm really interested in the cultural aspects of that. Like, how do you build democratic culture as part of that? And what are the aesthetics of surrounding a citizen assembly, a vote? How do you, we recognize that, people are living in a culture that looks nothing like our political culture every day, right? That involves music and food and joy and connection, and they're looking for belonging and purpose. And I think those elements have to be built in, and that thinking about those things, not just inside the assembly, but outside the room. Like, how do you build a kind of joyful democratic culture that's swirling around the outside of this room, so that the connection is really meeting human need as much as it's meeting like technical constitutive needs. And so I'm hoping that some of the next wave of work we can do together is to think about those things. Because the bad guys, the anti-democratic people, the QAnons, the conspiracy theorists, they are thinking about belonging, connection, purpose. And I think it's about time that we start to think about those things in a positive, joyful, resilient, connective way.
Andre, you've done this work, any design tips for this concept?
Well, I mean, I can bring in a Swiss perspective. So I'm a direct Democrat by DNA. So I'm thinking about how can we use deliberative processes to make direct democracy and the usage of our instruments here in Switzerland better. Let me give you two examples. We have the optional referendum. So when legislative process passes a law, you can announce a referendum. You collect 50,000 signatures within 100 days, and we can vote on the law. Now this happens regularly, and so this is, and then the work of the legislative process is challenged by the people. Then in a vote, if the law is rejected by the people and they say, no, we are not happy with this law, the whole legislative process starts again from scratch. So I think I like to think about opportunities where to bring in deliberative processes in these direct democratic instruments. And I think this would be one opportunity to bring in a citizens' assembly when a law has been rejected by the public, to bring in actually the public into the policy creation process and design together a new solution which potentially can be adopted by the public. So to really also strengthen the connection between the politicians and ordinary citizens, and get the help from ordinary citizens. How do we need to change the law that you will at the end accept it? Another example is with the usage of popular initiatives. You can have an idea, you collect 100,000 signatures, we will vote on it. Now, the thing with the popular initiatives, there are 9 out of 10 popular initiatives get rejected by the people. So there's a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort into making use of this instrument. Why not use a citizens' assembly at the very beginning of the formulation for a popular initiative? Hey, we have an idea, we want to bring in forward issue X, Y, Z. Let's think together, how do we need to create or formulate this initiative to increase the probability that it will be accepted? So these are kind of 2 examples, and I'm really looking forward to discuss these kinds of complements to really strengthen these 2 forms and make democracy better through the complementation of these 2.
Thank you. So we're going to go to the questions from all of you here. I'm going to make a very non-democratic decision to extend this 5 minutes into the coffee break to 11:35. So we have 11, 12 minutes for questions. And also then you can continue discussions and questions with the 3 folks here at the coffee break. We hope you will enjoy fine coffees in your Zoom rooms as well. Do we have a microphone here in the room? Who's got the mic? Great. Let us start over here, sitting on the stairs, which is where I always sit in press conferences because I'm late. There's a microphone right behind you so we can hear.
Okay, I have two comments. One is regarding Switzerland. It was said that in Switzerland is a lot of participation, and I would say there are a lot of opportunities for participating. We shouldn't just keep the problem that abstention is quite high in the country, really high, I would say. And also exclusion is a problem. As was mentioned in the panel before, there are at least 25% of the population living in the country who is not allowed to have a voice. So I think these are key challenges that should be considered also when talking about democracy and legitimacy. And the second is regarding the sorted assemblies. I disagree with the reading of the case of Chile, but we have no time now for that. But I would like to say something about the legitimacy and descriptive representation. To evaluate from outside that a convention or an assembly is descriptively representative doesn't mean that will be representative in the opinion of the people. We know we need more information regarding if the people wants or not this kind of authorization. I mean, this is a classical in the study and discussion of the sorted assemblies. And the same regarding legitimacy, I think would be a bit, I don't know, naive, even if it's too hard word, to assume that the convention will be legitimate just because it's inclusive. If we really focus only in inclusion and we give too much weight to inclusion, then just introduce mandatory voting and that's it. And we are talking about a much more complex problem. So I think these are my comments.
Could we get another question or comment? Maybe there's some down here. Yes, right in front of you, gentlemen.
I hear this opposition for one side or the other between direct democracy, which is the voting of an issue, yes or no, and on the other side, the discussion, the deliberation. And I think one is part and parcel of the other one. First, we discuss. And second, we vote on it because otherwise we can continue discussing for a lifetime and we never get to anywhere. So, and I like one of the presenters mentioning respectful dialogue. And I think we need that in this conference, rather than labeling people as dictators or fascists or whatever label it is. Let's understand that they look at democracy a little different than us and not just label them and evilize them with pictures or with words. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to get a question from Merwin Mayer, who's a Democracy International board member from that cradle of California governors, Austria.
Yeah, I have a simple question on climate assemblies, because I tried to sell it to the Austrian government and finally we made it, we got a climate assembly, but I was not very successful in connecting it to direct democracy, as we said, because they reject everything on direct democracy and they see deliberative democracy as a substitute to direct democracy, as it was already said. But the concrete question is, if there is not a revolutionary process, as in Switzerland 150 years ago, and forcing the decision makers to give away some power, how can we make it on an evolutionary way? That means, can we bring in deliberation in combination with direct democracy in the party logics? And it's what it's always about. I've read Schumpeter and his describing competitive democracy. He sees it as companies just acting for collecting votes, as making profits. And he says it's the only way we can organize democracy. I'm skeptical about that. But he's very precise what he described 70 years ago. And we still have competitive democracy of parties staying in power, getting in power, everything else. And I always get the question when I describe deliberative democracy and direct democracy and why it is good for the public and the people, etc. They say, Yeah, very nice, very nice. It could be good for the people, but what does it bring to the party? What is the value added for the party? And as long as you cannot describe this, we just hear you, we will be friendly, but that's it.
Thank you for that. It reminds me of a question I didn't ask, which was, if does deliberative democracy, does the sortition-based things, if they're so strong, why aren't we using them to just prop up representative things that we've lost trust in, or direct democratic systems that are driven by money? Why not just cut it out? And, if I'm reading Elaine Landemore right, just go right to the deliberative, make that the system. One last question, if we could have, maybe in the very back, if it's not too far, and then we get some responses. Gentleman in the suit, yeah, please. But please make it quick. We're short on time. Bruno is hovering. He's got the hook, like Chuck Barris.
Thanks. Can I get? Yeah, thanks so much. Karstenberg from UCI and UI background fellow. Fascinating debate, keeping it very short. David, you said your suggestion for improving the system and the combination of deliberative and direct democracy was to oblige to engage in a respectful way with citizens' assemblies results, as it has been proposed in the Ost Belgian project. But we don't know the results yet from Ost Belgium. I think we must be honest. And what makes you so sure that this will actually change? Because now in the European Union, we are supposed to develop such a tool. The Conference on the Future of Europe, as you know, is exactly proposing to make them permanent. And I am not so sure whether this formulation to oblige them to engage in a respectful way makes a big difference to really have an impact. So the impact question I would like to address again, because I think this is the key for success.
Okay, and my apologies. Sir, can you do it in 10 seconds? Your question? Yeah, please, let's get that, because I was pointing that. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
It won't be 10 seconds. First of all, we need to express gratitude to the Gilets jaunes of France, who have been gathering in local assembly every Wednesday and in protest every Saturday since November of 2018 with almost zero media coverage. They have killed dozens have lost eyes, arms, hands, and they're all about direct democracy. I used to manage democratic political campaigns in the Western United States. I'm from Oregon, and I'm here to tell you it's gone. There's no one you can vote for. There's no one you can sue. We had an international Yellow Vest discussion. I have a question really quick. And the first tack is micro decentralized voluntary direct democracy assemblies denying any outside authority. So I want to ask, I'm here to, my experience tells me there is no solutions within the established systems. Who on the panel is ready to start an actual revolution from the ground up?
Okay. I'm always for revolution, but the panelists, you've heard these questions. Give you each a chance to respond to any of the things you've heard. Calypso, do you want to go first?
Yes, sure. I wasn't expecting. So yes, thank you,
I hope
Joe.
you could hear okay.
I mean, we can hear from the question how much energy there is on this topic. This is so important. It's everywhere in the world. So my last point would be to say, let's keep the momentum. The second is to say, Wendy, you spoke to my heart. 20 years ago, I proposed the Woodstock of European democratic politics, but it fell on deaf ears with, men in dark suits. But it's exactly what I mean by bringing together, the pedagogy of randomness that you picked up with the atmospherics, the aesthetics. Our young people, our students, our kids, they go to festivals. That's how they do it. So I think that we're talking about, if we are talking about citizens' assemblies having a direct impact, because then at the end of the day, there would be a direct democracy of vote, then the embeddedness needs to be a ripple effect, embedded in festivals with tens of thousands of people themselves speaking to a broader public. This is the kind of dynamics we have to have. So this leads me to the last question and the climate assemblies and all of that. We saw in France, Macron created this climate change citizen assembly as his very cunning response to Gilets jaunes, in part to neutralize that kind of and channel it you know, and that's kind of interesting that we're using the question, the other question was using evolutionary, revolutionary. You know, should we oppose it? Their proposals were so revolutionary that in fact, only a very small portion, maybe 15% of these proposals were actually implemented by the parliament. So, and it's not surprising for reasons we could discuss. So it's, you know, there is a fear in the powers that be that deliberation followed by direct vote can be too revolutionary. And this is why this is such a difficult and worthwhile struggle. But my last point is to pick up on Carsten's very last question on the EU, because we are having also conversation, you know, between the US and the EU with the rest of the world. And in the EU, this conference on the future of Europe was actually very fascinating, very worthwhile, very promising, in spite of all its flaws that, in fact, Ian said it best, you know, was too large, too short, but nevertheless, hyper promising. But let's remember that in Europe, you have a sacrosanct monopoly of initiative. You have all these political monopolies. And so it's going to be a very long road to actually push back and put forward some of the more revolutionary ideas that we're discussing here.
We have to end. Thank you. David, Karsten Berg from Freiburg, Germany's greenest city, had a specific question for David. David, did you hear it?
Yeah, very quickly.
Yeah, can you answer it quickly and to finish up here?
And Karsten, I know, has been following this much more closely than I have, and I've really enjoyed working with him on some of this. The way I put it is a lot of talk about revolutionary change. I honestly, my thought would be the best way to see this is in terms of small steps. It's small steps, and gradually we learn as we go along. We learn from our mistakes. So Macron made huge mistakes with his convention in France, and as a result, we have the 150 who are now like a political movement. The former members have now mobilized in anger about the fact that so many of their proposals have been ignored. And I think that's the trick. If you give them some voice, the members of a citizens' assembly, in what's supposed to be a respectful dialogue with the representative institutions, and if that is not treated with respectfully, you run the risk of a backlash, and then you learn from that small step.
Thank you very much. Sorry we did not have more time. I want to give a big thanks for this incredible panel. Coffee break is next. Bruno has important announcements. Go.
Yes, it's not only coffee break. You get also some food, but a little bit of food at least. But I have the book, and the book says at 12 o'clock, the track workshops and panels start. So please find your way. It's on page 25. There are people around helping you to the different places. This Neubad is a very fascinating place, but it's sometimes not so easy to find it. And please also use your right to vote in the ballot. The ballot box is up there. Please use that right. We will be very interested. So thank you very much for this morning, and good continuation.